Shalom, everyone. Forgot what I was going to say. Hope you guys are doing good and having a good week, and hope that everyone has a good Shavuot coming up very shortly. And also, of course, be praying for the peace of Jerusalem and of Israel and what they're going through, being bombarded over there, and the pray for wisdom for their leaders and protection for them in this current crisis that's going on, and our nation for sure as well. Nature, yeah, that as well. Nature and nation. Having trouble talking today.
It's okay.
All right, today's Torah portion, we're starting a new sefer or new book, and we are in the book of Numbers, or in Hebrew that's going to be Bamidbar. That means in the wilderness or in the desert. And I try to mention this once in a while because I think it's interesting, and a lot of people don't know it. It's not widely publicized or talked about, but the book of Psalms or Tehillim is broken down into 5 books, really. I mean, we think of the book of Psalms as one book, and it is, but it's also broken down into 5 sections. In each of those 5 sections will correspond with each book of the Torah, each of the 5 books of Moses or of the Torah. So just happened to think about that and thought I would mention it. Also, FYI, I find this kind of interesting because I'm sort of interested in, or very interested often in, the not only the etymology of words, but how words relate to each other. And the word, we talked about the name of the Torah portion, Bamidbar, that means in the wilderness. The first part of that word with the ba sound is the prefix, meaning in or in thee, but the word for wilderness or desert is Midbar. And I find it interesting that when you look up the word Midbar, or wilderness, desert, it says in the sense of driving, a pasture, open field, blah, blah, blah. Also speech, and I find that interesting. And when you look up, it'll say from the word OT 1696. You look up the root word of the word desert. It is the Hebrew word devar, that is word. And actually, we have a book that we'll get into next, Devarim, that means words. And so that just being merely the plural of the word devar that we talk about, that means word, or it can mean a lot of different things, various types of communication, or to even talk, teach, tell, think, utter. I mean, there's a lot of ways that word can be translated, but it's interesting to me that the idea of a desert, or what's maybe not just a synonym for a desert, but symbolism of desert, isolation, separation, lots of different things, and that
Crucible.
Yeah, testing. It comes from that root of word.
Like bringing forth the word in you.
Yeah, and that's where they received God's word, was in the wilderness, or Bamidbar, in the desert. This particular Torah portion begins, and by the way, I'll give you the section that we'll be talking about today, in the book of Numbers, chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 4, verse 20. The Haftarah reading is Hosea 1:10 through chapter 2, verse 22. And you might also like to check out 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 12 through 20. All right, so this begins by saying, Hashem spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first of the 2nd month in the 2nd year after their exodus from the land of Egypt, saying. And so God is speaking now to Moses, not from Mount Sinai, but from the tabernacle, or the Mishkan, or the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, as it's translates it here, or the tent of the congregation, which is going to be Ohel Moed. So there's a lot going on there, and I mention it from time to time, but it's probably good too that the Torah is not always 100% in chronological order, although as a general rule it is. You can often, it likely is, but you wouldn't want to just automatically assume that the Torah is in chronological order in every place. And there's the more that I've studied and the more that I've lived, it's just better not to assume anything. It really is best to not assume anything and to check everything out. And even if something seems right, or even if you read something in here, you might get a wrong idea if you don't look at all of the passages and everything taken together. And I've talked about that before. Actually, we'll talk about it pretty soon in the Torah portion, Shalach Lakah, when it talks about Moses sending these 12 delegates out to spy out the land. And so if you just read that passage in isolation, you're going to come up with some wrong ideas that if you don't read Deuteronomy chapter 1 that gives more of the background of that, you'll end up with a different picture than what actually happened. And there's a lot of places like that just give you a perspective or snapshot that doesn't explain everything. And so if you just take one thing, like often, one of the criticisms that's made often is people say the Bible contradicts itself all over the place. And I wouldn't state it that way, but I would certainly say that there's a number of passages that if you look here and you read this and you read something somewhere else, there certainly appears to be a contradiction. And if you don't if you don't notice a discrepancy, you're not paying attention, because there are. But often, and it was Rabbi Ishmael that said, when two verses appear to contradict each other, they are reconciled in a third. And so, once again, the principle of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And same with nearly every issue. And I talk about that all the time, about how, whether various political or theological issues, and I'm not always saying there's a middle ground. Sometimes there's absolutely not. But when it comes to theology and concepts and truth, there certainly is. Whether you're talking about law and grace or predestination and choice or many other things, it's not one or the other. And if you just read one passage that's dealing with choice or another passage that's dealing with predestination, and you say, oh, it must be this, you're going to end up in error. We're not to turn hard to the right hand or left hand, so we have to do the homework and go through the extra effort and have the patience to figure out how these things actually synthesize. And again, we talk about I have before, and we've discussed it, like even a light bulb, we see these principles at work of the positive charge, the negative charge, and the neutral filament, the neutrality that keeps these two opposite forces, or two contradictions, if you want to say it that way, that reconciles these things and makes it all work.
Well, and I mean, even in your own life, like for those of us that write in a journal, you may record an event in the journal, and depending on the point that you're making at that time, you're going to see it through a certain lens, you're going to relay it a certain way, but it's by no means typically an exhaustive account of the whole event, and it's certainly not usually taking into account other people's perspectives. But then if it's a big event, and you keep reading in the journal, you're likely to come across other days and times where maybe you discuss more from a different viewpoint, or there were details you just forgot in the initial thing of the moment. And usually you can get, people will find the journals of different artists and writers and great people and famous people, and they'll have to read quite a bit to get a real consensus of any one event. We just don't think to put every single thing pertaining to something down. And even conversations that you have, you can tell an event to someone and then have a conversation in a couple of days about the same event, and you're talking to someone else, and maybe the person you talked to previously is there, and they might say, well, you didn't tell me that. Well, I didn't think to. So there's always context and details that come out later that really round out something. Bible's no different.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then on the other hand, often the longer time passes, details become more fuzzy and more confused. And I was reminded of it this week. There was a situation that transpired, and I was asked to give an account of some things that had gone on. And then I got to thinking about it, because I wasn't really sure, but the more I thought about it, now I believe I'm different than a lot of people in this area, because I tend to really doubt myself.
I agree.
I want so much to be accurate and correct that I a lot of times even doubt myself about things, or doubt what I think that I know, which I think is probably a good idea. But I'll give you an example here. If you've ever seen, there's a program, I don't know if it's still on there, it was on, I saw it on Netflix a couple of years ago, called Brain Games. And they had this one bit, whatever you would call it, and these people are out in a park, and there's a magician out there doing tricks, and all the people are watching this amazing stuff this talented magician is doing. And then suddenly there's a commotion, and a woman comes running by, and there's a couple of men that are running, I think, in opposite directions. I think, from what I remember, one of the men was chasing another man. And so they end up having kind of these people ended up being sort of questioned, about a dozen of them, like a jury.
Yeah.
And so they're asking people what happened, and most of them thought the woman was robbed, but there was some disagreement about what she was wearing, mm-hmm. and what the suspect was wearing, mm-hmm. as opposed to the person who was after him, chasing him. And well, it turns out, I think there was about 12 of them, like a jury. But 2 of the people in this supposed jury were plants. And they convinced the rest of the jury of things that weren't true. They'd say, yeah, you remember she had on a red shirt. Yeah, and this guy did this. You guys remember? Well, they convinced most of these people of things that actually were false, and they would have convicted the wrong person. And this happens real easily. And I know that is something that can happen. So when somebody starts saying, yeah, you remember, you were there, I try to be very careful, because I think that I know that I'm human and I could be influenced by that. And if I can't really remember it, if the details are fuzzy by myself, I don't really want that other confusing me of thinking, well, was that really the way it happened or not?
Well, you brought up having this thing happen this week. Were you going to make, or is that the point?
That's about all I can say about that, other than that's what I got to thinking about. Is that one of the people were saying, yeah, you remember this and that. And I thought, well, I don't clearly. He may be right, but I can't believe what he's saying and start believing that's what I experienced, or that what happened, because I could end up implicating someone, or accusing someone, or damaging someone, and I don't know.
Well, you would be a false witness at that point. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, even though I might convince myself that I was correct.
Still false.
But yeah.
Well, and when you say you don't like to be wrong, a lot of people out there might laugh and say, well, nobody does. But you say it more from, as I would mean it, our personalities, our egos don't like to be wrong, mm-hmm. because we feel like we lose power. But the less you live after the dictates and desires of your ego, and the more you align to truly wanting to represent what is true, mm-hmm. before God, to others, for God, in the invisibility of God to most people who will represent Him. It's the people who profess to believe on Him, and so those people have a responsibility to try to get everything as accurate as possible, whatever that ends up happening to our ego, and however we need to be beat on or burned up or adjusted is just how it needs to happen. If you're trying to represent God to humanity, or you have a relationship with God, you're going to want to be as accurate as possible, as blameless as the way Psalms would put it, walk blameless. Not that anybody can truly walk blameless every moment of their lives, but in our integrity, we can certainly walk blameless.
Well, it has to be a value. And yeah, no one likes to be wrong or proven wrong or anything like that. And because, they don't want the bruised ego or whatever.
Sure.
And I understand, and I'm not, I'm not
beyond all that.
No, I'm not. But on the other hand, what is more reprehensible or more frightening to me is giving a false account of something because I'm not diligent with details, and that I either take away or add to, exaggerate something worse than it is, or make something not as bad when it really is. And that's a real danger. And that's what, our system, to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, that's what that is. It's like the whole thing, and not diminishing or taking away important parts, or not adding to and distorting it either. And so that's what that's about. Because or thinking about, or a lot of people think about all the people out there on Facebook and YouTube and the internet, and even before this came along, and writing books and talking to coworkers and family, that is speaking for God in some way, or the Bible, of saying the Bible says this and that. And think about all the people that says, well, the Bible says, one thing or another, and it doesn't. And it's bad enough if you say that, for your own self, that you're just giving an opinion about something that you happen to be wrong about. That could be pretty bad, and horribly bad in some cases, like you were talking about. If you're bearing false witness against someone, and saying bad things about someone that's not even true.
Or you don't know that they're true.
Yeah, but how much more, when you're misrepresenting God's word to people. That's a pretty horrible thing. And so it's better for all of us to try to, and we probably all have, because of our understanding, hopefully, is better now than it used to be. But maybe when we were talking, I can think about in the past, talking with people from different denominations, and I was saying things that I thought to be true, but I was just merely parroting theology that I had been taught through either my own denominational background or through some book or video that I had seen, that later, as I learned more, I found out to be wrong in some way.
Right. Yeah,
So
just want to mitigate that as much as possible.
So it's not nearly as exciting. Good storytellers are often not real sticklers for accuracy. Usually the good storytellers tend to really exaggerate things.
Well, and if a couple times I've gone to see a storyteller, like a professional storyteller, you understand that the story they're telling is a story, and it's meant for entertainment.
Yeah,
and
that's different.
There's a point to it, and when we read fairy tales or we watch movies, and read books that are fiction, we understand that those things are fiction. You understand going in, but when the danger comes in, when you live your life on a daily basis, talking to people out of the strength of your own opinion, or the strength of your own desires, or your own feelings, or your own biases, as if it's the truth, I don't think we're going to be held guiltless for things like that. It's a muscle that you work, and you're not trying to split hairs to just be one of those people that is always a naysayer, but you don't want to go after the majority or bow to the pressure of the majority on you, whether you're friends or family or whatever. This is true, I don't, but they want you to be one of them. It's peer pressure all over again. It doesn't stop in school. It never stops. And then you can really give great offense to people when you won't just side with them out of what they say loyalty is. But if your highest loyalty is to the truth, and your highest duty and devotion is to try to accurately represent what is true, then it just is. And whatever comes into conflict with that just has to be a secondary byproduct.
Yeah. Well, and This Torah portion begins with Hashem spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month, in the second year after their exodus from the land of Egypt. So this is going to be on a Rosh Chodesh, or a new moon, the beginning of the month. And it says, take a census of the entire assembly of the children of Israel according to their families, according to their father's house, by the number of their names, every male to their head count, from 20 years of age and up, everyone who goes out to the legion in Israel. You shall count them according to their legions, you and Aaron, and with you shall be one man from each tribe, a man who is a leader of his father's household. So they're going to count all of the men who are 20 years of age and above, all that are able to go out into the military, or legion as it calls it here. And Rashi, the Jewish commentator, he says that, if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure that's correct, check it out, that I believe he's one of them that says that it is age 20 to 60, even though it doesn't state it here in the text. So Moses and Aaron are going to do this counting, or oversee it, along with the 12 delegates over each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And what's going to happen, that we've talked about before, actually, in going back, probably we discussed it in the Torah portion Kitasa in the book of Exodus. That means when you take, and it's talking about the census there. And so there are a number of censuses that have been taken. Supposedly God took one. I don't know how the census was performed or conducted. Back in Exodus chapter 12, it says that there was 600,000, or around 600,000 footmen, or this type of individual who came out of the land of Egypt. Then later on in the book of Exodus chapter 38 verse 26, it says that there were 603,550 at that time. And I believe that is, I can't remember which Torah portion that is stated in, but there was a census taken, and there were 603,550 counted. Okay, this is kind of one of those cases, because in our Torah portion today, it says that there are 603,550 that are counted here. And you can read that in verse 46. Even all they that were numbered were 600,000 and 3,550. That's the exact same number that was given over in Exodus chapter 38 verse 26. So obviously it's just a recounting of the same census, right? Because it's the same number. No, apparently not. As strange as that is, that you would end up with the exact same number, taking it on even 2 different days, because people are always being born and always dying, that, that would seem impossible. But apparently a strange anomaly happened, that they end up with the same number of people. Well, okay, first of all, this Torah portion begins with Hashem speaking to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai from the tent of meeting. Okay, well, when we go back to that Torah portion there, Kitasa, when you take, or a better translation even that we could look at for that, or this, is when you lift up the head. And so it's this idea of being elevated when you're counted, although they didn't actually count people, but they counted half shekels, because every man who was part of the census was to give a half shekel, which is equivalent to 20 gerahs. And so then they would count up the number of shekels to determine the people. Okay, well, when you go back and you read about the tabernacle, and you read about all the details about what they made from what, that we find out that the shekels that were donated were used to make the what's the word, chapters or sockets.
Hmm.
The sockets above on the poles were made out of the silver, the chesed, that was donated by the men who in the census. Well, the tabernacle is already operational and built, completed, and it was completed actually in the first month of the second year, and this is going on in the first of the second month in the second year. And so, and there's other details that we can fill in that will tell us that it's not the same census, even though it's the same number. And so there's a good example there, because naturally most level-headed, rational people, if they're reading about a census in Exodus, and they're reading about one in Numbers, and it's the same exact number, that you would assume that that's the same census. But another thing is that so it's believed that that first census happened after the golden calf incident, and that then, so there's the tabernacle built and everything, and they used the silver for the sockets, and by everything that we know and understand about the first ones, the Levites were counted with everybody else. Now, in this Torah portion, we're going to see that at the golden calf incident, or right after that, the Levites are set apart now by God, because remember, when Moses said, "Who is on the Lord's side? Let him come unto me," and the Levites did not participate. They all took a stand against the golden calf participation, and so they were set apart at that time, and they took the place at that time from all of the firstborn of the Israelites, which originally all of the firstborn would have been the priesthood. But now the Levites have taken the place, and the Levites now are the firstborn. And the Levites, God says, are the contribution. They're like a gift. That it's a strange idea in a way of thinking about this, but that the Israelite people give this tribe, the Levites, to God, and then from that, and they are going to, that tribe, that gift is going to minister for the priest. They're going to be a gift for the priest to help them and to guard the tabernacle. You know, they're going to all have a function in that. And I'll go ahead and mention it now, because it talks about it in this Torah portion, that there are three families of the Levites, of the Levien, which are the Kohat family, the Merari family, and the Gershon family. And the Kohat family, it's from the Kohat family that the priests, the Kohanim, are taken from that family, but they have to be sons of Aaron. So you have this larger family, and then from them it's narrowed down to Aaron and his sons, and then later it's going to be narrowed down to the descendants of Pinchas. The priesthood goes down through that line. And so each of these people of the Levites, are going to be responsible to guard and to transport the mobile tabernacle. And so the Kohat family, they're responsible for transporting the furniture of the tabernacle, which would be, the Ark of the Covenant, the menorah, the altars, the altar of incense, and the copper altar.
Sacred objects.
Yeah, all of these things. And the Merari family, they're responsible for all of the pegs and the poles and all of the planks and all of that kind of stuff. And then the Gershonites, or the Gershon family, they are responsible for transporting all of the curtains and the fabrics and the hides and skins and all of this stuff. And so when we look at that and what their roles are, essentially, I've talked about before how the one of the things the tabernacle represents is a body, and so basically the Gershonites transport the skin and the coverings of the body. The Merari tribe transports the bones, the skeletal structure, and the Kahat tribe transports the organs. And they take down the body, they take down the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and they raise it up. And I believe that is found in verse 52, chapter 1, verse 52, where it says that, I think it's verse 41 and 52, that the Levites will take it down, and then the Levites will set up the tabernacle again. And when it says that they're to take it down, it's the Hebrew word yared, like you might know somebody named Jared. That's what same name, same word, having to do with being brought down. And interestingly, in Genesis, that is the term that Jacob uses in talking about. And if Benjamin is not brought back, it will bring down my gray head in sorrow to Sheol. And so it can have this idea of not just descending, but descending in terms of death. And when it says the Levites will raise it up again, it says that basically when it says raise it up, or they'll set it up, it is the Hebrew word kum that is going to directly correspond. That's in Numbers, chapter 1, verse 51, by the way. When the tabernacle or Mishkan is to be pitched, the Levites shall set it up. And that word, kum, when it says they'll raise it up, is going to correspond to the Greek word anastemi that is used a number of times in the New Testament. For example, when Yeshua says, I will raise him up at the last day. So it has this direct connotation with the idea of resurrection. And so the Levites are going to take it down, and the Levites will resurrect it, the Mishkan, the body. And interestingly, when you start looking into the idea of angels or these heavenly hosts and beings, you'll see that at least some of them are priests. And just like in the book of Revelation, or different places, you'll see that this angel comes in with a golden censer and all of that. I mean, these angels are carrying out priestly duties. That the people on earth are sort of a reflection of the macro of the heavenly things there.
Well, and I'm just thinking as you're talking about them taking down the tabernacle and resurrecting it, all of that is according to the will of the Lord, because they didn't do that except that the pillar of fire and cloud removed and went somewhere else, and they followed it, as opposed to Rome coming in and sacking the temple later, and Yeshua talking about raise it up, he will raise it up again. I mean, just thinking, I don't really have a point, and just my wheels are turning a little bit, like, at the will of God, it going down, like you were talking about, unto death. But it's not a problem because it's at the will of God, and it goes back up at the will of God. But the judgment that came by the hand of, first time Babylon and then the second time Rome, it was because of their sin. And yet the high priest of Yeshua, he raised it up again. A different tabernacle, one written on their hearts. It's just, there's so many symbols and so many mirror images and archetypes. I mean, just absolutely through the Torah and the Old Testament about what was to come. It's endless.
No, yeah. Lots of that. Yeah, I was having all these thoughts, and now I can't remember much of it right now. But no, it's okay. No, that was good thoughts that you had, that you shared. And no, I was thinking about the idea, like in Matthew 24, it says, and then he will send his angels, and they'll gather together his elect from the four corners of heaven, from one end of heaven to another. Well, obviously a lot of that elect is dead, and those angels will be performing know you not that you're the temple of the Holy Spirit, and that it's
Mm-hmm.
all this idea of the temple, the tabernacle, the body is related, and tear down this temple,
Right.
and in 3 days I'll raise it
Right.
up. And part of that is that apparently the angels, just as the priests, the Kohanim, or the Levites rather, were the people who took down and raised up that body. These angels seem to be under the headship of Yeshua,
Mm-hmm.
the captain of the guard, um, is doing the same thing, in the future at the resurrection. And it might be a good idea to mention here that because there's some other censuses, we
Mm-hmm.
really don't have time to talk about all of them, but in the book of Numbers, toward the end of this book, toward the end of Bamidbar, at that census, there are 601,730 counted. And so it's a loss.
Mm-hmm.
They actually lose people in the population over the course of toward the end of the 40 years, right before they're getting ready to go in to the land. And when you look at the difference of those numbers of the census in Exodus, the census at the beginning of Numbers, 603,550, and compare it with the 701,000, is that right? 601,730, you have a discrepancy or a difference of 1,820 that was lost. And I find that fascinating because that happens to be the exact number of times that the name of God appears in the Torah, 1,820 times. And so I remember there was, I believe, a rabbi that talks about how that although they lost that number, they gained God's name.
Well, in the pruning,
Yeah.
no branch can bear fruit of itself; it must remain in the vine. And pruning.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And of course, in the book of Revelation, we have a census of some kind there,
Yeah.
because in Revelation 7, we see that there's 12,000 from Judah, 12,000, and even Levi is counted in Revelation, as opposed to in the Torah portion today, Levi is counted separately. And there ends up being 22,000 Levites. Exactly, 22,000 precisely, which is really an interesting number.
I agree.
That represents, that is the number of this remnant. And so, like there were in at the Golden Calf, the Levites that were not a part of that, they were set apart. This remnant was set apart, and it says there's 22,000 of them, and they were counted now from 1 month old and above, as opposed to 20 years to 60 that are part of the military campaign. But so there's 22,000 of them, just like in Elijah's day, Elijah being the mirror of Moses. There was a remnant of 7,000 that didn't bow the knee to Baal. And so the number 7,000, all of that has to do with the idea of a remnant at times. And I've talked, of course, in the past about the 22s and 7s and how that gives us the ratio of pi, which is an interesting thing to get into also. But I've talked about that in the past. There was some things that I wanted to get into. Let's talk about this, because these people, it says, all of these that are going to be counted, it says in for example, Numbers chapter 1 verse 52, and the children of Israel shall pitch their tents, every man by his own camp, every man by his own standard throughout their host. Now the word standard there is deglo. And if you look that up, it's going to take you to the Hebrew word degel, that means a banner or a flag or standard, from the word degal. And this degel is going to correspond to the Greek word tasso, and tasso is the root of the word tagma. So stay with me. Josephus says that the Greek word togma is the same. He translates the Latin word, what is it, legion, as this Greek word togma. So the point is, I'm connecting the Hebrew, the Greek, and the Latin with this idea of standard is also the word for legion or a military troop. And so when we look at the New Testament, like in the book of 1 Corinthians 15, and the topic of that book is the resurrection. And it says this in 1 Corinthians 15, 22 through 23, for as in Adam all die, even so in Christ shall all be made alive, death and resurrection. But every man in his own order, and the word order there is togma. Christ the firstfruits, afterward they that are Christ at his coming. Every man in his own order. And again, the word togma, the Greek word there, is going to used by Josephus for a military unit. He uses this term for the Latin word legion. So, stated another way, the resurrection will occur. There is an order to it and a structure, the way the resurrection will happen. Depending upon your particular ensign or banner, it unfolds that way. There is which indicates to me that, well, some people are resurrected earlier. Certain groups are resurrected earlier than other groups. I mean, it might be right at the same time, in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, yet there is an order and a structure of the way that unfolds, and it is based upon what your particular legion, your particular degel, your particular banner, your ensign. And so each of the tribes of Israel each had their own flag, their own banner.
Well, and when they moved and they took everything down, Levi went first.
No.
Was it last?
No. Judah went first.
That's right.
Levi's traveled always in the middle.
Okay. And so the point is that they had a particular, like you're saying, they had a particular order where they packed up all of their stuff and the tribes went in the same order each time. They rose and they settled. And then, like you said, Levi, when we were going through the portion, it said something about Levi being around them, it didn't say buffer, but like a buffer.
Between the tabernacle.
Yes, so that the presence of the Lord didn't break out on them, almost like something, and I don't know electricity, but like you've got
insulation.
Yeah, you've got a thing where you've got the live wire, and that's the way it's supposed to be. The presence is supposed to be there; it's supposed to be alive. But then you've also got to have this thing that keeps around it. So my mind was going kind of in that circle too, like each one in its order, and with the resurrection going down, coming up at the will of the Lord. Like, what does that imply for the resurrection? That each of these tribes had their same order, and I get them confused. But whoever was first was always first, and they had their order.
Judah was first in that, and Dan was last. Of course, we need to probably mention at this point that there were 4 sections in each of these. The 12 tribes, there was 4 head tribes, and so there were 3 tribes to each direction of the compass. And then they were surrounding the Levites and then the priest in the tabernacle. And so Dan was the rear guard, and he was always the last. The first shall be last, the last shall be first, this kind of thing. It's pretty interesting, there's these so, and I can't remember why I went ahead and brought up that there were 4 of these head tribes. Well, because that's in their travels, those that traveled with Judah, which Zebulun and Issachar, they all traveled together. And so there was a census of the tribe of Judah, and there was a census of the tribe Issachar and Zebulun, and then those groups are all counted together too. And
So they're alike. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
in the resurrection, each in their own order, there is a similitude, a similarity. I was thinking about this when I was going through the portion, that it wouldn't necessarily be the way I might organize it, just for different reasons. But there's got to be some kind of a similar function or order with all the tribes that are on each side with each other.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so in the resurrection, that would hold true also. It's just an interesting thing to think about.
Each tribe had their own unique identity. For example, Issachar and Zebulun. But then they had their broader identity, which was Judah's, the line of the tribe of Judah to the east. So they were part of that structure as well. And then everybody as a whole had their identity and in the whole thing of being an Israelite. And so, yeah, it's, from you get these different separations and different broader identifications. And that might be good to quickly talk about this, about, like, most people are familiar with the idea of the line of the tribe of Judah, and the line being the symbol for Judah, their flag, their ensign. And from what we can tell, to the south, then the head tribe was Reuben, and his was some say it was like a man, like a person, and others say that it was mandrakes, which they actually look like people because of the mandrakes that he traded to, or gave to his mother, that she traded to Rachel to spend the night with Jacob. And then to the west, we have Ephraim is the head tribe there, and then to the north, Dan is the head tribe to the north. And so there's lots of meaning in the different directions too. That each direction has its own energy to it, and symbolism and meaning.
Yeah.
Just like, one of the favorite theological topics of a lot of people, particularly that are interested in prophecy and stuff, is why is Dan missing from the census in the book of Revelation? And why is he there? And most of the time people say things like, well, because the tribe of Dan got off into such horrible idolatry.
They
and
all
such.
did.
Yeah, they did. And that's why he's missing. I don't much buy that. I don't really think that he's missing for that reason. Dan is the head tribe to the north, and the nature of the concept of north, or Tzafon, is a mystery. That's what it means. Gloomy, unclear. And so the tribe that is associated with north naturally is going to be maybe more of a mystery than some of the others, and that we have more detail about. But just as Levi is counted in that census that Dan is not counted in. And Levi is always counted separately, or at least after from the golden calf incident on, Levi is always counted separately from everybody else. But he's counted among this group in the book of Revelation. So maybe another tribe now is counted separately. What about that? Because maybe the function has changed, and maybe, see, Dan is the judge, just like Samson and others. Levi, the priests come from them. They're ministers. They have their own function, their own order, their own identity. And so maybe at that time, now the judges, perhaps, of Dan are set apart. The guard and everything. And so I wouldn't be too quickly just to count Dan out permanently. And his ensign, by the way, Dan's ensign, I haven't mentioned it, was a serpent, because it says Dan was a serpent, by the way, in the book of Genesis. And apparently then his ensign, his symbol, was changed later to an eagle, a flying eagle, which is the enemy of a serpent in a way. But on the other hand, you have these pictures throughout history of these dragon type creatures, and that is sort of a bird reptilian creature that you see in a lot of folklore and stuff. And real quickly, Ephraim to the west was an ox or bull. That's basically the word shur in shore in Hebrew, which can be an ox or bull. And I'll let you jump in.
Just Dan, it's endlessly fascinating. And you talk about how some people say, with all the idolatry he got involved in, if you go look at the tribe of Benjamin and what they got involved in, was it Gibeah? I may have that wrong.
Right, Gibeah.
I mean, there were just all of the tribes that did,
Book of Judges, chapter 24, I think. They're about.
You know, you just have to be, like you said when we first got started, you have to be really careful about making snap judgments with just part of the information.
In that scenario that you brought up, if you read that, it's around chapter 24 of Judges. You might want to back up. But Benjamin was almost annihilated as a tribe.
Yep.
And that was such a horrible thing that could not be allowed.
Yeah.
That you can read it and see how they saved that tribe that would have perished. So, did you have something else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, well, and I was just thinking about the symbol for Dan with the snake at first. Not all snakes are poisonous, but when you have an ensign as a snake, it's, to me, there's a fast, quick, sharp, deadly kind of potentially probably poisonous thing. There's a death aspect. Whether you end up dying, you come close to death. I mean, even if you're saved. And then also with the eagle, they eat the dead. They're kind of a bird of
prey.
Yeah, and they eat dead things. And so it's interesting to think about, how we're brought up to think about death and to think about snakes, like in the Christian church, that it's just bad and it's just the devil. I mean, no, it's not just that. There are all of these archetypes and these symbols have a spectrum that if you just turn off because of the way you're taught that one thing is just all bad, you're going to miss a lot of different nuance and truths that can come in to really inform something. I find it interesting that the tribe that put out so many judges, that the ensigns both deal with death. And through the death of Yeshua, you would say you died because of your sin, but then through the death of Yeshua, humanity is saved if they will accept him. And so there's just so many redemptive, resurrective around the death concept. There's still so much grace and redemption and means of being resurrected through that. That's just interesting to me. Yeah,
and I've talked about it before, and we'll get into it in the upcoming Torah portion. But most people don't think about a snake as being symbolic of the Messiah, but it can be, and I'll go into it and show it at that time. Well, real quickly, the most famous verse in the whole Bible, if you want to look it up, John 3:16, if you look at the context of that verse, most people don't know it. Sometimes you get a chance, you're talking to a pastor, ask him if he knows the context of John 3:16. He probably won't, but if you back up 2 verses, you'll see the context of John 3:16 is the serpent on the pole in the book of Numbers that we'll get to a little bit later on. Incidentally, in terms of the symbolism, it's interesting, I think, probably not coincidental, that originally the symbol for this country was a snake, and then it was changed to an eagle.
I keep forgetting that.
Yeah, which is pretty interesting, I think. So we've looked at, there's a lot to say on these subjects, but when we see in the book of Hebrews, for example, quoting from the book of Exodus, that the tabernacle and all of those items and the services, all of this stuff, was given to be made precisely after the pattern of heavenly things. That's found in the book of Hebrews. I think it's in chapter 8, I believe. Hebrews 8 or 9, something like that.
Very big difference. it's a very different concept than how what we're experiencing now in this country, where there are no objective absolutes. You're to absolutely make these this furniture after the pattern that I give you, that is the objective standard, no matter how you want to worship me, and no matter what's in your mind or in your heart, what things you want to put in there. If you want my holy presence to come down among you, you are going to make it after the objective standard that I give you, not that you give me.
Absolutely. Well, here in Hebrews 8, it says, "For if he were on earth, that is the Messiah, he should not be a priest, seeing that there are priests who offer gifts according to the law, who serve unto the example and shadow of heavenly things. So the priesthood does, but also the all of these other things." And it goes on, "As Moses was admonished of God when he was about to make the tabernacle, for see, saith he, do you make all things according to the pattern showed to thee on the mount." So here it says that those things, including the priesthood, the tabernacle, and all of the articles and items, were an example and shadow of heavenly things. So we might think, what's a synonym? What's another way of saying that? We might say, well, they're a shadow, a symbol of spiritual things. Yeah, let's look at it more literally. A shadow or a representation of heavenly things. Look up to the sky at night, and what do you see? You see stars and constellations in the day, the sun. At night you see the moon and the stars and planets and everything. That these things are a shadows or symbolic of. So when we look at those head tribes that we talked about, which the symbols of them are the lion, the man, the ox/bull, serpent, eagle, we end up with the four main divisions of the year, because those signs, those constellations, are going to represent those four divisions of the year, which are the spring equinox, the autumn equinox, and the summer and winter solstices and all of that. Each of these, and we can see this in a number of places, like in the book of Revelation chapter 12, this woman clothed with the sun, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars, or constellations, if you will, being clothed with the moon, the sun, moon, and stars. And you can see, again, if you go back to Genesis and Joseph's dreams, he had a dream in which the sun and moon and the 11 stars all bowed down and did obeisance to him. And his father and his brothers interpreted that to mean that the sun in that symbol represented Jacob, and the mother Rachel, and the stars, each of those constellations, the brothers. And it had to do with resurrection, as I've talked about before, because Rachel was dead at the time. So when we get back to Genesis, we'll see that those dreams had to do with the topic of death and resurrection.
A very recurring theme constantly throughout all the scriptures.
So these tribes being counted down here in their ensigns and their structure and the tabernacle and all of that, well, are the micro of the heavenly macro. Again, the book of Job, chapter 37, it says the heavens are as a molten looking glass, or a mirror. So as above, so below. And each of the, whether you're talking about the breastplate, the jewels and the breastplate, or the different constellations and all of that stuff, they're seen in the tribes of Israel. And there's a lot to say on that.
Oh gosh, and I mean, people get really kind of upset. Sometimes they're nervous and they think it's dangerous to talk about things like that, because they don't want to give credence to astrology or whatever. But I mean, who made the stars? Mm-hmm. He doesn't make anything in vain. It's to a purpose. Any stories that they tell by his order. And in the Torah, there's a couple, at least one place where he says, I call to witness against you this day heaven and earth, the heavens and the earth, and how they bear witness. And I mean, they're the witnesses to the contract. He's not just being weird about it and just pulling something out of a hat. He's actually bringing in witnesses that have the power to be witnesses. So there's some truth they're telling. There's some testimony they have to give, the earth and the heavens, or they wouldn't be called by God as witnesses to a sacred covenant with his people.
Absolutely. On page 1 of the Bible, it says that the sun, moon, and stars are to be for signs. Is the first thing, signs and seasons and days and years, but number 1, it says the first thing therefore is for signs. And of course, most people, most believers, let me use that word, they believe this, but the cognitive dissonance and the superstitious training that just automatically kicks in keeps people from seeing it, because a lot of the people that get so excited about the eclipses and things like that, the blood moons and all of that, and it's like, wow, you got the blood moon coming up and all of this, wow, and they're following on Passover and Sukkot 2 years in a row back in I think 2014, 2015, and just a lot of these strange events, these solar eclipses and the blood moons. It's like, wow, the blood moons and everything. Wonder what that means, because it's got to mean something, right? Well, it does, and that's not astronomy that you're talking about. If you think it means something.
Right, if you assign a meaning to these events, I mean, astronomy is basically the study of bodies, their movements, how they relate to each other in physical space. But if you're assigning meaning to something, a biblical meaning, a meaning of a message from God to the people of the earth, you're not in astronomy.
No, that's and that's what the Bible deals with both. The Bible ascribes symbolism and meaning to these things. They're for signs. And furthermore, the book of Psalms, chapter 19, the heavens declare the glory of God.
They're made to.
And the firmament is handiwork. Day unto day they utter speech, and night unto night knowledge. And there's no language that where their voice is not heard. And so every day and every night the heavens are speaking. They're giving forth knowledge.
Their testimony.
Yeah, and they do testify. And there's the book of Job talks a lot about this. There's in the book of Acts, a lot of these constellations are mentioned in the Bible, particularly Job and other places too. It says in Micah, seek ye him, or Amos, seek ye him who made Orion and the 7 stars, which is, we're talking about the Pleiades, that is also mentioned in the book of Job, chapter 38. Can you loose the bands of Orion or bind the sweet influences of Pleiades?
It's pretty.
Yeah, and do you know the ordinances of heaven and their dominion thereof upon the earth? And so, according to the Bible, they actually do have an effect on the earth, which people know this too. Again, cognitive dissonance. I remember hearing Sam Harris the other day, the noted atheist, in a debate with Jordan Peterson, and he was talking about astrology and how foolish it was. He used that to try to discredit the scriptures and believers, and Jordan Peterson took an interesting approach to defend astrology, and that not that everything about that is correct, but that there is truth in it. But if I ask a lot of people, if I ask Sam Harris, for example, so Mr. Harris, do you believe that the heavenly bodies have any effect on you of your destiny or your future? He would say, no, it's complete hogwash. It has not. It doesn't affect anything. I would say, why do those waters react at certain times? Why what we call the tide?
Sure.
And he would go, oh yeah, well that's different.
That's physical.
Yeah, that's physical. And I'd say, okay, they do affect things then physically. We can,
right.
And he
First
would,
the natural, then the spiritual.
He probably would be like, oh no, I forgot, I wasn't thinking in those terms, and so I'm just saying they have no effect. But okay, yeah, they have a physical, but don't. Well, you denied that they had any effect, and now you've been forced to admit that they do have a physical effect. And I don't know to what extent I need to look at the research and see. I'd like to see the crime statistics, and people could say, well, maybe on full moons there's more crime because people can see better and more. I don't know, but I know a lot of law enforcement believe, and hospitals and people believe that. It may not doesn't prove that it's true, but the Bible does show that those things do have a cause. Well, the Bethlehem star.
Right.
Talk about cognitive dissonance of people that want to completely dismiss constellations and astrology. All of those people practically believe that wise men from Babylon, from the east, these magi, these magicians, astrologers that knew how to interpret the signs in the heaven, were the ones who discovered first the Messiah's birth.
And they showed up where he was. I mean, it's one thing to think you know what you think you know, and then you trek out and you don't find anything. They not only read it, they read it accurately, and they showed up there, and they were meant to show up there.
Much more to say on all these topics, but we'll have to leave it for another time. And I really appreciate you joining us today, and hope you and your families are doing well. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Hope you have a good Shabbat, good Pentecost.
See ya.
Bye-bye.